Joseph Allen Stein, the philosophy and works of Joseph Allen Stein. Joseph Allen Stein was a major figure in the establishment of a regional modern architecture in San Francisco Bay Area, United States, in the 1940s and 1950s during the early days of the environmental design movement. Today, environmental design is common day, everyday word that we use. However, in the 40s and 50s, which was really the post-war period, it is found that environmental design was actually a movement where we wanted to return back to ecology, to come back here and to see how environmental design could actually affect architectural design, urban design and landscape design. So, Joseph Allen Stein is noted for designing several important buildings vis-a-vis environmental design movement in India. Most notably in the Lodi estate, central Delhi, nicknamed Steinabad after him. So, the next time you visit New Delhi and you wish to go to Lodi estate and look at India Habitat Center and the India International Center as well as the Triveni Kala at New Delhi, which is next to the Mandi House complex, you would know that you are visiting parts of Steinabad. We've heard of Shahjahanabad, we've heard of Tughlakabad, we've heard of Firozabad, but have you heard of Steinabad? Well, the group of buildings that comprise buildings by Joseph Allen Stein along Lodi Road, Lodi Estate, Max Muller are called areas of Steinabad. So, imagine the contribution of Joseph Allen Stein to the field of ecological environmental design, having an entire estate named after him. And not to stop there, you have Joseph Allen Stein Lane, which is the only road in New Delhi to be named after an architect. So, it's a proud moment for all of us here today to be studying the works and philosophy of Joseph Allen Stein. So, we move on to how the philosophy of Joseph Allen Stein's early contributors helped shape his works in India and abroad. Stein was born in Nebraska on April 10, 1912, completed his studies at the University of Illinois and the École des Beaux-Arts at Fontainebleau. Stein attended the Cranbrook Academy in Michigan, United States, which is a legendary campus, designed by the famous architect Eero Saarinen. Well, let me remind you here, Eero Saarinen was the man behind the TWA terminal, the airport which is shaped on the wings of bird in flight. So, Google on TWA terminal and you will find what Eero Saarinen contributed to the world of architecture, and that too in airport design. So, the legendary campus of Cranbrook Academy, designed by Saarinen and filled in with numerous sculptures that you can see, which were by Carl Mills, the Swedish sculptor. So, you have all these as examples of Cranbrook Academy of Art, wherein these to influence landscape design and instill a lot of environmental design into Stein's design vocabulary. And on the right here you have a picture of Eero Saarinen. And this is the famous forecourt of the Cranbrook Design Academy and the pool into which are floating these enormous, huge sculptures. Stein moved to California in 1938 to work with Austrian architect Richard Neutra. So, look at the influences. On one side of the scale was Eero Saarinen, on the other side was Richard Neutra. In 1942, Stein established his own office in San Francisco, building many modern residences as well as progressive residential projects such as a 400 family cooperative housing project in California by the name of Ladera. Ladera was actually a community housing scheme where the entire focus was on how families could reunite together, reunite and have large land holdings as well as have houses which would be part of nature as well as part of urban facilities. The founders of the PHA, as it was called, the Peninsula Housing Association, was like any other post-war home builder society. because they were typically disenchanted with typical suburban developments. They had turned towards cooperative organization and the promise it held for an ideal democratic community. The project distributed 400 single family houses on a hilly site which was 256 acres, a tract near Sao Palo Alto, south of San Francisco. So managing this hilly terrain was largely the challenge that Stein had to face, and how he could manipulate these contours and actually put in here 400 single family units was the challenge that he was to face. And he dealt with it in a very particularly beautiful manner. Let's move on. The plan called also for an elementary school. I mentioned cooperative housing, which meant that they would have elementary schools, they would have kindergartens, they would have playgrounds, they would have gas stations, they would have guest houses, recreational community, commercial, health, and all facilities that were needed to make an integrated neighborhood. The shopping center was situated at the edge of the property in order to also serve surrounding developments, just as the community buildings of the migrant camps had served residents and neighboring farmers alike. To remind you once again, this is a post-war housing society, which means that we needed to also rehabilitate people and how they would actually react to community schemes. The large cooperative residential community at Ladera near Pausalo had idealist social aims of simplicity surrounded by landscape beauty in the post-war period. Also similar to this was Clarence Stein and Clarence Perry's neighborhood concept, and you have the town of Milton Keynes and New Jersey today, which are living examples of post-war community development. And also closer home you have the Chandigarh sectors, which talk about also social housing. And you have 13 categories of house types within the city of Chandigarh to give you 13 house type variations for all the government people who were to work and serve the Chandigarh administration at the time when this city was conceived. Well, Ladera was not successful. Unsuccessful in raising financial funds, Stein moved to Europe in the early 1950s because he was completely disillusioned by what was happening at Ladera. On the right you see all the conceptual plans that were made for Ladera and the degree of ingenuity that went into building Ladera's complex units. But at the same time, while Stein was unsuccessful in Europe, in the United States, he moved to Europe in the early 1950s. And to remind you, that was the time when India's partition was also taking place, 47 to be precise. Richard Neutra, who had been invited by the government of West Bengal to be an advisor, this was also the time when Pandit Nehru was trying to look at India as a modernization process, and into which he said that we must bring in the best from the West in order to make a wonderful modern India. So the 1950s, we had Richard Neutra as an advisor to the government of West Bengal. He was the one who proposed Stein's name as head of the newly formed Architecture and Planning Department at the Bengal Engineering College in Calcutta. So the BE College was the one accepting the invitation. Stein arrived in 1952, little realizing that he would stay on. So here we are on to the next slide, and you see on your right a picture of the beautiful Bengal Engineering College campus, where Stein was to serve as the head of the institute and deliver wonderfully inspiring lectures to the students, because he was also heralding in the modern movement into India. 1952, the year Stein was invited by Prime Minister Nehru to India to head the newly formed Architecture and Planning Department at the Bengal Engineering College. Stein arrived in India already formed as a mature and self-assured designer and planner, and immediately plunged into the major project being undertaken in West Bengal, which was the Durgapur Township. Now here I want to again remind you what was happening in India. We were building these wonderful industrial steel plants because Durgapur, Bhilai, Rourkela, Jamshedpur, also we were building university towns, administrative towns, we were building Gandhinagar, there was Bhubaneswar being planned, there was Chandigarh, and this new town movement was happening all over the country. Durgapur Township was being designed by Benjamin Polk, who was an American architect living in Calcutta. He continued his practice in New Delhi, that is Stein, until his retirement in 1995, incorporating local materials, architectural elements into the modern structural vocabulary. What you see on the right is actually the Durgapur Ispat Nagri. This is what you find on the outside of the entrance gate to this township. So along with Benjamin Polk, his first assignment, Stein's first assignment in India was to design the Durgapur township. So what could not be fulfilled at Ladera became a promise to be fulfilled at Durgapur. The full glow of the Nehruvian Enlightenment, as modern India is called, was influencing the emergence of an entirely new modern India. While other famous architects, a basic difference between Stein and the others, while they were coming in and going forth into India and out, was Le Corbusier, Louis Kahn, Charles and Ray Ames, Edward Durrell Stone, Maxwell Fry, Jane Drew, Herbert Baker, Edwin Lutyens, so on and so forth. Stein was slightly different. He made India his home and sought to be actively involved in the making of the new society. So this is what is the basic difference between Stein and the others who came in and went away. Later, after moving from Calcutta, Stein continued his practice in New Delhi for 40 years until his retirement in 1995. And all along, he was incorporating the environmental movement, utilizing local materials, architectural elements in the modern structural vocabulary of the new building typologies that he was generating. His most noted works are located at the Lodi estate, also called Steinabad, in Delhi, and include the India International Centre, 1959 to 1962, Ford Foundation Headquarters, 1968, Ford Foundation Guest House, 1972, UNICEF Headquarters, 1981, and the India Habitat Centre, 1993. So on the right, you see a picture of the earliest works, that is India International Centre, and at bottom you see the most recent of his works, that is the India Habitat. The first project, the India International Centre. What you see is actually a building set in the garden, and Stein's works were actually ecological masterpieces set within the green landscape. Now, what inspired this? The location of this is next to the Lodi Gardens in New Delhi, and the Lodi Gardens were part of the great Sultanate period of Delhi. So when Stein moved to Delhi, at that time, what was he doing? He was, during the weekends, he was looking at all the little villages surrounded by the blazing yellow mustard fields in winter, and he developed a fascination for the traditions of Delhi building and its effect on Jui could not be clearer than in the India International Centre. Jui, as Joseph Allen Stein was fondly called by his colleagues, Habib Rahman was one of them, and others in the city. Now, at the IIC, one finds the surfaces and materials that Stein used were all borrowed technology and technique from the local stone, the cast concrete jalis, the blue and the green ceramic tiles as highlights, basically an updating of the Sultanate architecture of Delhi and retransforming it to suit the contemporary functions. This is what Stein had learned to love and admire through his weekend explorations in Delhi. So which means he was one person who could actually live in a particular place and imbibe from that place, as we'll see in more slides. Yeah. The India International Centre, two more views of this you find. And what did Stein have to say about this building? Two things have essentially guided my work, that is Stein. One is what you might call an interest and a search for an appropriate modern regionalism. I would put equal emphasis on both words, regional and modern, because regional without modern is reactionary and modern without regional is insensitive and inappropriate. The second one is to seek the character of the solution and the nature of the problem as much as one can possibly. To say it very simply, while Stein was extremely modern in his approach, he was talking about minimalism, he was talking about straight lines, he was talking about orthogonal symmetry, he was talking about less is more. All this time he was doing. But at the same time, he was looking at, if you can see the picture on the right, there is the Lodi tomb here. And actually, his buildings lead you on, and the sight lines reach to this. So he's actually trying to tell us a story that all this should knit together and weave into the most important and significant part, that is history. So you can actually place modern buildings next to historic ones and also treat the landscape in a manner that all of them can sit together side by side and yet be happy. It's something very important that we need to learn, especially now when we are building in almost postmodern contemporary times. To link building blocks, Stein had this fascination to create bridges on top, which were not only shading devices, but at the same time links, very critical links, and where on the upper level pedestrian links would create the necessary visual connection, the physical link, and provide a chaja on top, which would actually be the sunbreaker. More pictures of the India International Center to show you how light and shade and water, all these you will find as elements of the Sultanate style. Basically, the pool of lilies here, the green here, and a building that takes the form of a curve. See here, look at this picture. It's a pencil rendering showing the relationship to the Lodi garden tomb that I showed you in the previous slide. That's it. That's here, another one. And this building, it sits beautifully into the landscape, an auditorium also part of it. And this curve is what you see here. And that's the place where you had the double height porch in the previous picture. Along with this, within the same campus, you have the Memorial Plaza, which was a dedication to Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, as both of these were basically protagonists of humanism, of nonviolence within India. So a very befitting tribute called the Memorial Plaza is slightly hidden in the campus of the Indian International Center. So next time you are at Delhi, do try and find these things. Well, it was not only public buildings that Stein did, he did numerous projects, and his forte lay in the fact that he was trying to all the time see how could he diversify and learn from each building type that he was designing. So the American school, which was actually a brainchild of a few Americans who started with a one-room school because they wanted to teach the children who were part of the American officers who had come to serve in India for various assignments. So it was a one-room school which was actually to be transformed into this sprawlingly beautiful landscape which was full of stones and rocky outcrops. It's a little lesser known, but it's a stunning American school set in the rolling landscape of Chanakyapuri. Here Stein used the existing landform and rocky outcrops. He did not clean up the site. That's the best part. You can still see these stones there. And he designed his buildings to weave in and out of the space. They would actually come in and go out, and the corridors were juxtaposed with the classrooms, incorporating the rocks in surprising elements. So he was actually trying to make an environment that would suit the childlike exuberance of a school. It's an old picture of it's not very clear, but here you can see the shell forms. So even the form of the school was related to the kind of activity that would take place. In the model here, now each of these is actually a shell, a little shell, and all these come and rest here on this circular space, and each of these is a classroom. So you can actually join two of these together, remove the intermediate partition and create a bigger classroom, and you can extend them outwards. We'll show you in the next picture how it happens. Look at this. This is the construction system. A steel lattice dome is used over. So that's the steel lattice dome which is used over the audiovisual area. The classrooms utilize a shell arrangement funneling outwards both in height and width towards the edge of the buildings which surround the domed central common and visual hall. The elementary classroom, this is the elementary classroom, has openable exterior doors to expand the activity space left above. And this is the same space which when I close down, it makes a little classroom, and when I open it up, it brings the outdoor in contact with the interiors. So it's actually flexibility that can bring in the child's creativity. And you had numerous options of how to do the layouts. So this is another sketch which shows the flexible design classroom room furniture orientations, and it shows how one fan-shaped space could actually be divided and create two different classroom types and another third typology, which if I open up this screen, I can actually have this space as part of it. So within the space, what you see here is actually a sketch showing this part. So the kids can leave their stuff here, come and work here in groups. A teacher can hold a smaller group here, and it becomes very interactive. So this was the way he did the American school, giving a lot of flexibility in the design. Next, I come to the office that he makes for the Ford Foundation, again utilizing a structural system. Now, at that time, India was doing a lot of work in concrete. So he had an opportunity to build these coffer roofs, these vaulted roofs, these slabs and beams and post-tension structures could be brought in, and also utilize local materials which were abundantly available in the Aravalli Hills, of which the Delhi Ridge is now a part, and the use of local stone, local brick, and of course local labor. The Ford Foundation, these are black and white pictures, and here you actually see Joseph Allen Stein walking up the staircase that he has made in Ford Foundation. So actually he's connected through the staircase the entire building. The whole building is looped around the staircase, which is having these elements, which are the lights coming into the stairwell and lighting it up at different places. But look at the facades. He's bringing a lot of lightness and airiness into his building. The long spans are actually being taken care of by the ceiling beams being brought down here, and all these as different textures. The building has so many textures, and the idea of vertical gardens is also going to follow soon. Another thing that he did was, because of his environmental consciousness, was a Kashmir Conference Center. His interest in larger environmental issues and the looming crisis of deforestation in the Himalayas led him to become an advocate of sustainable development in ecologically fragile areas of the country. And it was this initiative that helped organize a conference on the protection of the world's monument environments as early as the 1960s. So the Kashmir Conference Center was the one in which he laid a lot of emphasis on how to integrate a complete hill and its contours to generate an urban form which would be reminiscent of the Charbagh concept of the Nishat Gardens and the Shalimar Gardens. So the use of water to reflect the buildings, the use of landscape, the use of orthogonal geometry, and basically a waterfront site into a union of water, garden and building. So basically the project is an effort to create buildings and gardens that would merge into the surroundings and thereby bring sympathetic attention to the gravely threatened natural place of beauty. So the ecological fragility of the site was the foremost guiding principle in the design of the Kashmir Conference Center. The Delhi buildings, once more getting back to Kamani Auditorium, the area around Mandi House, and you have the wonderful Triveni Kala Sangam Center for Arts and Drama and Music, and name the arts. Okay? It is here that his full design personality emerges, and what you see here is actually a lattice work. It's a jali of the side wall, the west wall, which is having a foreground of a beautiful tree which is not yet blossomed, but it can be a place of bloom once the flowers come out. The Triveni Kala Sangam, as it is popularly called, it's extremely distinguished by the elegant formal spaces, the beautifully muted but covered walkways, extensive planting, a lot of landscape, and the meticulous detailing and the use of material, color, texture. I mean, if it is a class of theory of design, this is the best place to actually take the students to. Taking cues from the existing built forms of the Sultanate period, once again, Stein's buildings here were also climate responsive and catered to the culture and lifestyle of the complexes that they supported. Covered walkways are all there in response to Delhi's composite climate. Detail and the precision quality is evident in Stein's work. Look at this jali. Look at the trellis. It's actually a composition of a number of small compositions, but which all come together in this motif. What was he trying to achieve with this? One was he was trying to look at the building not just as a facade, but he was trying to do articulation of the facade. What you see here is actually a blow up of this. So it's a screen, it's a jali. Okay. And when he's trying to formulate this screen as a perforated jali, and he's using these motifs, can you believe that they're all handcrafted? And it's actually reminiscent and reminds you of the jali of the Dargah of Salim Chishti at Fatehpur Sikri, or maybe the Red Fort, or maybe the Humayun's tomb at Delhi, or maybe even the work at some of the temples in Fatehpur Sikri, Jodhabai's palace, the Diwan-e-Khas, the Diwan-e-Aam. So basically these are interpretations, the modern day interpretations of the Sultanate style. The sensitivity to detail. Look at the way he wants to make a walkway to connect two buildings. This is another method of creating sunbreakers. So the shadow patterns that are cast here, the greenery that is added to it, the element of color that comes in, is actually trying to scale down. He could have very easily done a straight concrete pavement here and end of story. But no, there's actually a very sensitive treatment that he's been doing to the floorscape, to the walls, and to the roof. And then you have the seasonal flowers coming in there, the green, and then in the next picture you have more of it happening. So also the idea of the vertical garden. He was very fond of the human scale in his spaces. He did not want to detract from the human being at any cost. And here you see the Joseph Allen Stein lane picture, which you see at Steinabad. Again, looking at these pictures, one is reminded of the Mughal gardens. The Charbagh concept is again there in the meticulous detailing, because these buildings are there to soothe and to inspire. And it is no surprise that 4 decades of India's cultural life have actually been nurtured at the India International Center and the Triveni Kala Sangam, where so many students have emerged notably for their achievements in art, painting, drama, music, vocal and instrumental music. I mean, you have to name it to know. Everybody at some point of time have been to Triveni, either to watch or to put up an exhibition, or to hear a recital, or to watch a play. It could be anything. But most of us at some point of time have been remotely connected to this wonderful Kala Sangam. Again, the model that I was talking about, and this is the way he's actually linked this building to the outside, and it's the way he's linked this and they cast shadows. So these shadow patterns are actually trying to tell us a story. And what is the story? To relate the climate, the microclimate, to the building, and how to scale down from this tall block that you have here, how it gradually comes down to the auditorium, which is actually a large component of building, and how this rectangular block and this smaller block here are all being laced up with this trellis, and this intermediate space that he's caught on here in between is actually the landscaped court, which serves as the open air theatre for this outside space, which you'll see in the next slide. Okay? Not just these 2 buildings, these are just representative, but basically There is the American International School, the Australian High Commission, the Gandhi King Plaza, the Lodi Gardens Conservatory, the Open Air Memorial at the Indian International Centre. All these, the World Wildlife Fund, the UNICEF building, are all reminiscent of what he brought with him, the Californian modernism. Why does he call it the Californian modernism? Because that's where Ladera began. And what he could not fulfill there at Ladera is actually finding